Spanning a total of 23 years from 1966 to 1989, Bush War was one of Africa's longest wars. The Bush War was fought in northern Namibia, now known as Southwest Africa, and in southern Angola, the so-called border area. Not only this, the skirmishes against anti-South African Defence Force forces took place throughout the subcontinent in places like southwest Zambia, Botswana, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, former homelands within South Africa, and South Africa itself. Watch the video to the end as we tell you the details of South Africa's border wars. The beginning. The Bush War started when South Africa began threatening Southwest Africa, a former German colony granted mandate rights by the League of Nations at the Treaty of Versailles during World War I. With the establishment of the Southwest African People's Organization, or SWAPO, and its military wing, the PLAN, also known as the People's Liberation Army of Namibia, the local population rebelled against this and South Africa's apartheid policies in 1960. During the late 1960s, the Southwest African People's Organization launched a far more potent guerrilla campaign against South African rule in Southwest Africa and eventually independent Namibia. Black Africans' armed resistance carried out sporadic acts of terrorism in South Africa by black liberation forces located in neighboring nations, most of which were commanded by the African National Congress, or ANC, and its military wing. Although the border war wasn't technically an existential struggle for South Africa, the strategic objectives that drove it could have threatened the nation's territorial integrity. As a result of an increase in planned sabotage and attacks, South Africa replaced its police with the army in order to secure the border and stop the attacks. On April 1, 1974, the army was able to diminish insurgency incidences by coordinated follow-up operations, border security, and expertise. Moreover, these planned attacks and insurgencies persisted year after year with increased ferocity. The Portuguese collapse. At the time, Portugal was embroiled in 3 civil conflicts in its colonies, Angola, Mozambique, and Guinea-Bissau, a war they could hardly afford because it was one of the poorer European nations at the time, and this gave rise to local opposition increasing the conflict. Consequently, Portugal became a military state after the Caetano government was overthrown peacefully in 1974, and the Portuguese military was quickly withdrawn from Angola and the other colonies. Angola was immediately left with a leadership vacuum and was being torn internally by 3 rival liberation movements, including the MPLA, the Popular Movement for the Liberation of Angola. Furthermore, due to the collapse of Portuguese colonial power in Angola, there was a military void where SWAPO forces could easily train, arm, and detach into northern Southwest Africa. In order to support anti-apartheid military operations, Mozambique, whose Portuguese control had also ended, had strong economic ties to South Africa and did not want to see those ties break. Not only this, the MK's capacity to develop and maintain forces capable of invading South Africa from any of the neighboring black African governments was severely hampered by South African Special Operations units, both overt and clandestine to varying degrees. The Civil War. The Portuguese collaborated with South Africa to ensure that PLAN could not construct a springboard in southern Angola. As a result, South Africa intervened in Angola with Operation Savannah in 1975. It was worried about the instability of the country and the possibility of SWAPO gaining a foothold across the Southwest African border. This was the South African Defence Force's first significant cross-border operation and semi-conventional conflict since World War II. Operation Savannah's objectives were to rid southern Angola of the MPLA presence and aid UNITA in securing the southern and eastern regions of the nations, so that UNITA could have a successful electoral campaign in the elections slated for November 11, 1975. Then came the election day, on which the civil war still continued, and the MPLA, having forced the opposition out of Luanda, proclaimed independence. Agostinho Neto was elected as the country's first president after Portugal recognized its independence. The year 1975 saw Cuba provide Angola with military assistance because growing Cuban backing served the objective of Fidel Castro's strategy of bringing about popular people's revolutions in third world countries. Fidel turned his attention to Africa as he failed to spark such revolutions in Latin America. Now, with Cuba's backing, there were 36,000 voluntary Cuban military men in Angola by March 1976. During that time, the Soviet Union also provided the FAPLA, also known as the Angolan Army, with significant amounts of military equipment, as well as military advisors and trainers, significantly worsening the situation for South Africa and maybe the West as a whole. Even though South Africa was expelled from the international community due to its apartheid policy, most Western governments still considered it to be pro-Western and supported it in its efforts to counter the perceived threat of communism. Consequently, the small SADF task forces marched 3,000 kilometers into Angola in just 33 days, but was never given the order to conquer the entire nation. Although the UNITA proxy forces might have secured the south, it was not in the SADF's best interest to take control of the entire country of Angola militarily, as it would not be able to maintain military control over the entire nation, which is 3 times the size of Iraq, for an extended period of time. It's worth mentioning that with the exception of the brief withdrawal at the Battle of Ibo, which is the basis for the claims made by Cuba and Angola, the SADF prevailed in all engagements. The civil war continued because the FNLA and UNITA did not accept the MPLA's declaration of independence, with covert assistance from South Africa and the USA. The CIA had also given South Africa the go-ahead to secretly support the SADF operation. But due to USA ignorance of Angola and Africa, as well as the embarrassment of the Vietnam War withdrawal still fresh in American minds, the US withdrew from the operation, leaving South Africa to fight the MPLA on its own. With the aid of the SADF and continued assistance from the West throughout the Bush War, UNITA gained a firm foothold and continued to dominate the liberation movement in South Angola up to the end of the conflict. However, the situation in Angola deteriorated, plunging the nation into a bloody civil conflict that persisted long past the conclusion of the South African Bush War, lasting until August 2002. Weapons and vision. South Africa's other primary motivation for engagement in this conflict was the fight against the liberation groups of SWAPO in Namibia, MPLA in Angola, ANC and PAC in South Africa, Frelimo in Mozambique, and ZANLA and ZIPRA in Zimbabwe. Apart from the fact that the Marxist Eastern Bloc supported each and every one of these liberation movements, the movements strove to end colonialism in the subcontinent. It is worth mentioning that at the commencement of the Bush War in 1966, the SADF had some obsolete World War II-era weapons, including Vickers 303-inch machine guns, 3-inch mortars, and 25-pounder and 5.5-inch artillery pieces. Moreover, the less dependable Bedford trucks and the superior Unimog light trucks introduced in the 1970s were being used for transportation. After the SADF realized how obsolete its arsenal was during Operation Savannah in 1975-76, a significant rearming effort was started to modernize the SADF. Consequently, Arms Corps was established in 1976 with the mission of rearming the SADF with modern weapons. The SADF turned to a number of homegrown weapon development programs because it was unable to buy any weapons on the open market. Military restrictions barred South Africa from purchasing aircraft. Therefore, throughout the Bush War, it had to maintain its current stock of Mirage 3 and Mirage F1 bombers. You can gain an idea of their restriction with the fact that jets were only flown in the direst circumstances, frequently depriving ground forces of air cover. Even so, the SADF adapted their doctrine to this constraint by maximizing the use of cover, camouflage, deception, and nighttime movement. to combat the growing air threat. The earlier Mirage 3s were upgraded to Cheetah C, D, and E versions, comparable to the Israeli Kafir fighter. Moreover, a wide variety of mine-resistant vehicles that could shield occupants from numerous anti-tank mine blasts were created by South Africa using lessons acquired from the Rhodesian anti-mine vehicles. End of war. By the time the fighting ended in 1988, the SADF and UNITA were on one side, and the FAPLA and Cuban troops were on the other. Meanwhile, skirmishes between the SADF and SWAPO were ongoing across the operational area. Over a 23-year period, the SADF carried out multiple cross-border assaults, with the invading forces targeting PLAN staging and training sites in Angola and southwest Zambia. On the other hand, PLAN used staging camps in Angola to sneak into southwest Africa. The size of insurgent groups which were armed with mortars, mines, and rocket launchers ranged from a few to more than 100. Their targets included the SADF base in northern southwest Africa, locals who supported the SADF, village heads, as well as road mining and infrastructure sabotage. In this parched region, infiltration channels frequently used local population support from dispersed Ovambo villages in Ovamboland and followed well-known water sources. Based on Soviet military doctrine, PLAN bases in Angola included anti-aircraft gun emplacements, mortar pits, and small staging camps with a few grass and wooden shelters hidden by nature and ringed by a zigzag trench system. During the course of the battle, the FAPLA suffered one of the worst defeats to befall an army since World War II. When UNITA attempted to intensify its resistance to the invaders in Coando Cubango, the SADF's Operation Modular intervention got underway. It then picked up as South African artillery thwarted two attempts by the FAPLA to bridge the Lomba River. The Bush War was eventually over in 1989, as neither side was completely defeated nor surrendered. However, large-scale conventional battles fought during Operations Modular, Hooper, and Paca made it abundantly evident to the FAPLA forces supported by Cuba and Russia that the SADF could not be beaten on the battlefield without incurring a heavy cost. As a result, both sides came to the conclusion that a negotiated settlement is the only option. That's it from today's video. We hope you enjoyed the content, and if you did, show some love and hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so that you never miss out on any of the amazing videos we have in store for you.